Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you happenstance into this Truth Bomb riff. It is my great honor to bring you this incredible discussion with a patriot and a singer-songwriter by the name of Mike Williams. We're recording this on Monday, March 10th, 2025 at approximately 10 a.m. my time. And I'll do a quick introduction, Mike, about who you are and why we're talking. But I hope that by the end of this, those of you who are watching this decide to share this far and wide because I'm telling you, this is one of the most inspiring songs that I've ever heard that is leading into this discussion and what it's all about. So, Mike Williams is a battle tested medic. He's a problem solver, a lifelong musician. He blends frontline experience, IT precision, and deep compassion to heal through both action and music. Pretty interesting overview into kind of a window of who you are. But from what I understand, you've served, I believe, for about 10 years through a variety of constellation, I guess, of theaters of what are involvement in international conflict around the world for 10 years. Why don't you give me an insight, Mike, into your service and maybe a quick background on what that encompasses?
So in high school, if somebody would have asked me, would you serve? And I flat out said I never would serve. But that all changed when I was in college. I played professionally as a musician. I lived up in LA trying to make it up there for a couple of years and saw guys that were way better at playing music than myself, and they're living out of their cars. So came back and I went back to college. It was my third year as a 4.0 GPA biophysics major.
Wow.
And I was looking to go on a medical track. And my best friend, since I was 6 years old, he he was in a special operations unit and he was on standby. So I'm in my physics lab and I'm just thinking, my brother, he's going to be going overseas. He's going to hell. I walked out of my biophysics lab and went and I signed up and I ended up deploying overseas. This unit never mobilized. That's no fault on his. That's just kind of how things work. But I became a combat medic and I maintained that discipline for the little time I was in. After a couple of years, still wanting to work with my best friend, I reclassed into special operations. They never deployed us together, but I got to see some very exciting places like Haiti and Bosnia and southern Turkey because we weren't supposed to call it northern Iraq. So a lot of different deployments, but yeah, it's definitely perspective when you come back.
So you've kind of inferred a relationship with someone who was your best friend. I'm going to read this first, and then I'll kind of set up the question because I'm just meeting you for the first time. But the song that you wrote is called "The Price We Paid," and I'm going to include the link in the description down below. And again, people, please click on this. This song is magnificent, and the lyrics are unbelievably powerful, particularly in light of what we're seeing on the flip side of so-called Doge, where veterans and veteran assistance in all capacity based on the contracts of what obviously people who go to theaters and combat and come back for a variety of different ailments or mental scenarios, or you can the entire sort of constellation of things that that join people who have spent time in war obviously are now being rug pulled from the contract that they made with the federal government because of a billionaire's decision to try to create this context that we're spending money on things that are unnecessary or inefficient or bloated. When we're talking about, in this particular circumstance, veterans that have given it all for this country, but as a result of that, the contract wasn't fulfilled or isn't being fulfilled, of course, because of the forces that be that we're all under the thumb of that is making us sick, virally sick. And I'm going to read you some of the lyrics of this song that absolutely blew my mind. The song is called "The Price We Paid." And I'm just going to read the first kind of stanza of the lyrics and we'll talk about that. But it says, "I gave my all for freedom's call, but freedom doesn't catch my fall. The bills stack high, the pain runs deep. Restless night, no peaceful sleep. I paid the price for liberty, but now the cost is drowning me. And this song is about waking people up to veteran suicide, among other things. So, Mike, can you comment about where you were coming from when obviously you wrote those incredibly powerful lyrics?
Several months ago, I had the pleasure of meeting a fellow veteran brother, and he was also a combat medic like myself. He did a tour of duty in Iraq, and the burn pits they messed him up. It it slowly was destroying his lungs, and he's still fighting. So he gets back, and he chooses to do something less aggressive because he was a combat medic, and then he became a forward infantry scout. Gets home, he's like, okay, I'll do something more mellow. So he became a firefighter and then a paramedic. And he couldn't figure out why he'd just be going up a couple of steps and he'd just about pass out. So, of course, the fire department couldn't keep him. And he was going back to the VA to get checked multiple times. And what people don't realize is, as a veteran, unless I'm 100% disabled, I still have to pay out of pocket for the VA. That's not free. So this gentleman was paying out of pocket, and unfortunately, the VA there was a clerical error. They screwed up, and instead of sending him a bill to pay, they sent that to collections. He lost his house. He's got a wife. He's got two kids, and he was in bad shape. The person that I was introduced to, this organization, End Veteran Debt, and my project now partners with End Veteran Debt. They met up, and End Veteran Debt helped them out. But the thing I really want to make clear, that is our worth, that is our existence. And the last time you come home and you hang up that uniform, the military service is very, very clear that it is 99% monotony and it's 1% pure insanity. But when you hang up that uniform, you hang up a, a, a piece that you forged in yourself. And when you can't pay the bills on top of that, that's where, yeah, a lot of times, and I'm guilty of this too. And it was 1998, I was in Bosnia, and my beautiful wife, she, we'd, well, she was my fiance for 7 years, and I decided, I need to marry her because the best I could do with her putting up with my crap for 7 years is to give her $100,000 if I came home in a bag. And this veteran I'm talking about, when he was in the SGLI was up to $250,000. And I know that he was struggling with the same thought. I'm worth more dead than I am alive.
Jesus. Look, I'm so moved by that. I'm gonna play this. It's not gonna be the best quality because we don't have a ton of resources, but I want people to hear this, the quality of the song, um, based on that just a very emotional introduction. But I want people to hear this, and it's mind-boggling. But just let's just stay tuned here and let this play out for a moment. For the flag, for the scars, fought the battles near and far. I gave my youth, my flesh, my bone. But now I face this fight alone. The promise is made.
liberty, but now the cost is drowning me. I'm breaking my head. Don't see where.
Wow, Mike, I gotta tell you, man, that song almost brought me to tears, and it did the first time I heard it too. Many times I've heard it since over the weekend when I first, received this. But it touched me on so many levels, and I hope it shatters and pierces the veil of this insanity that we're in the midst of, and because everyone is under the same sort of onslaught that is attached to this attack on veterans as well. And I want to ask you a couple of questions if you don't mind.
Sure.
So, first of all, talk to me about some of those lyrics. I mean, what were you channeling? It's just they're so powerful and they're so clear and they're so clean and yet relatively simple, but yet so profound to encapsulate this nightmare, this tragic nightmare of people that literally are duty bound and honor and yet have the rug pulled out from underneath them and are buried by this country that they had fought for. And yet that powerful link, and I see this all the time, people are like, thank you for your service, right?
Right.
Pledge of allegiance, or excuse me, put your hand on your heart during the national anthem at a football game, and if you bend your knee like Colin Kaepernick, you're the enemy. What? It's like there's this distortion, there's this upside down perversion that people don't understand. Can you tell me what inspired you to write those poetic lyrics?
I put together the way that I unpack my experiences for my military service is I put that to music. That's where this comes from. And after hearing what happened to my brother, and just the shaft that he got from the VA, and he lost everything. And I was just meditating over that, and these are the words that came together.
So this was obviously, I mean, because I understand the production process and I understand when you put things together and to record and everything else, it's timely. And this is all pre Doge. This is all pre everything that took place in the last 7 weeks. That's just purged 8,000 members of the Veterans Administration Hospital in DC, not to mention everybody downstream who was a corollary to this. So the information that you've been providing that many veterans, and by the way, I have to tell you, one of my best friends, I can't even believe I haven't even thought about this throughout this process. Jesus Christ. One of my best friends, a guy who served in Iraq, served in Afghanistan, came back, worked in San Diego. One thing led to another. Many, many years later, committed suicide about 3 years ago, based on the same stuff. Okay.
You bring up a really good point, and the metrics are pretty brutal. Department of Veterans Affairs, they did a study in 2020, and they estimated about 17 veterans every day commit suicide. And in 2022, there was a study by America's Warrior Partnership in collaboration with University of Alabama and Duke University. They found that number was much closer to 44 suicides per day. But I got a trivia question I want to ask you here. What do you think the number one cause of death is in the military?
Suicide?
No.
What?
Accidents. Accidents are, yeah. And it doesn't take a brain surgeon to figure out that maybe not all those were really accidents. Because there's so many guys that I served with that, we're coming back and we're scrambling, we're trying to reinvent ourselves. Because when I got out, yeah, I could have went to work in a hospital as an ER technician. I could have, become a paramedic. But after 10 years of life and death, I was fried. I was completely smoked. The way I decided not to continue on that path was when I was in Haiti. And I was we were attached to a special forces team, working with third group. And we got called into an area that unfortunately was hostile. And it was a large crowd. It was about to be a riot. And there was gangs that were in the crowd that ended up pinning us down. And one of the guys on my team got hit. And I was so burned out at that point. I got to give them credit. It was the most creative ambush I'd ever been in my entire life. And there's bullets that were flying past my head. And the interesting thing is a bullet flying past your head, it's pretty close. It sounds just like a bee. And I'm waving these things off like it's an insect. And I'm thinking to myself, a professional assessment. These guys go to all the time and trouble to do the most creative ambush I've ever been in, but they can't shoot straight. And if you can't shoot straight, it's all about the basics, Now, in hindsight, I realized that I'm glad they couldn't shoot straight, all right? We probably wouldn't be talking. But the thing that occurred to me a month or two later is perhaps I should get a job where people are not actively trying to kill me as I'm doing my work. Mm. And so that's where, once I got out, you had that dual stress where nobody in the military is ever going to complain about, what they're going to do with all their money when they get out, because you're not paid well, right? You're doing this for service. And so when you get out, a lot of your skills will not directly transfer. If you're an 11 Bravo, an infantry soldier, you don't have a lot of options, So for me, it was a mad dash. I mean, I turned around and I picked up multiple IT professional certifications, and I jumped in and I had to keep going because I needed to start working before what little money I had right now. And I'm not the only one in that situation. Brothers and sisters in the military, yeah, they're in the same place.
Well, I mean, as you were describing that, I was thinking of the scenes in Black Hawk Down, and I was always, blown away by the sort of the stories. In fact, and I had mentioned my close friend, one of my favorite people in the existence of my life, William Hornburg was his name. his name was Billy. His nickname was Billy Badass, and he was telling me stories about being on the highway of death. This was after the first tour of Iraq, right? And
Right.
he was a gunman in one of those, you know, I'm trying to think of the vehicle, the armored vehicle that they used to use at that time period. I mean, they were basically Humvees, but he was set up in the back with this incredibly powerful, you know, I want to call it kind of like a Gatling gun, but whatever it doesn't matter what the exact precise weapon was. But his stories to me were because I'll tell you how this came to be, right? So right after 9/11 happened, I went to the Marine recruiter to enlist, and I wanted to fight and join, and do my duty as an American to respond to 9/11. What ultimately held me back were two things. One is I asked the recruiting sergeant at that time, I said, when do we get a chance to go to Saudi Arabia? And he looked at me like a deer in the headlights. And he was like, what are you talking about, Saudi Arabia? It was like he had absolutely no understanding of those who were involved with attacking us on 9/11 and what that meant. And I was asking that literally 2 months after 9/11. But I had been talking to my friend Billy Horenberg at that time, and he had come back from many tours and he had had PTSD trauma, but he was this a wonderful guy. And he was a musician too, by the way. And
Nice.
he started telling me stories. In fact, that's how I met him. He was traveling around the country playing his harmonica and his guitar, and he was trying to get rid of his PTSD. And that's where he landed where I was. And then we became close friends, and he ended up getting jobs playing at bars and places in my town where I lived and all that kind of stuff. And we became brothers. And he talked me out of moving forward, even though I didn't want to, because I realized that there was so much dystopia in our chain of command that we didn't even know who attacked us on 9/11. But he was telling me these stories of on the highway of death where he'd go mow down the Iraqi enemy, where because the gun was so powerful that he would literally evaporate people right in front of his eyes. Like he said he didn't know how many people he killed, but it was a lot. And he saw
You,
what?
we call that pink mist. Yeah, it's probably 50 cal that he was manning. But yeah, you
And
get hit by something like that, you're gone.
he got such incredibly deep, trauma, PTSD. And we had talked for years and years and years, and especially later after the great financial crisis, where veterans that were in their houses, many of them, tens of thousands, maybe more, had lost their houses to foreclosure because of a lot of stuff that you're talking about, because benefits ran out or, the Veteran Administration policy. And that's where I'm an expert, by the way, and all things great financial crisis that move forward that ultimately reveal what I'm about to introduce to you. But I want to get through this part first. Look, I know after 9/11 that there were many heroes in our society that joined up that would wind up going to multiple tours. They went to many, many tours in Iraq. They went to many, many tours in Afghanistan. They kept getting called because we have an all volunteer army and military, and they kept getting called back, and they'd go into these incredible tours. And after, I mean, this was way beyond anything that our GIs had done in World War II, way beyond anything that our GIs had done in Vietnam or Korea. This is a 20-year war. And yet, many of these guys wound up in theaters where nobody in the United States really understood what we were doing and why. And they were the forgotten class. Then they come back for all those tours to live this world you're talking about. Can you respond to me based on your experience and what you're trying to do to reach those guys and also the broader American populace to just wake up to the understand what the reality is of those who've actually been fighting for us for the last 2 decades?
That was interesting along what you're saying. When I got back from Haiti, I it's a very, very strange readjustment because when could just go out and get into my car and drive to the store, I'm thinking to myself, wow, I don't have to do a convoy brief. I don't have to have secondary comms. I don't need to make sure we're locked and loaded. I can just drive to the store. And it was a real weird adjustment because downrange, like Haiti and Bosnia, you have these little PXs, and you better like the can of shaving cream because you only got one. And so I'm at the grocery store and I have this whole wall of shaving cream I'm looking at, and I'm completely bewildered. I
Wow.
go pick one up. and set it back. And a person that worked there stopped and said, "Do you need help with anything?" I said, "No, no, I'm just not used to seeing this many choices." I was in Bosnia for close to a year. No, this was Haiti. I was in Haiti for close to a year. And she just very chipper, "Oh, were you vacationing there?"
Ha!
And I'm like, okay. And this is something, there's a word that I love. It's it's not that the person was ignorant, but they were innocent to what was happening. They had no exposure to that. And
That's incredible.
I've been baked in it for yeah, close to a year. So it's that innocence that I try to hold on to. Going back to the song, I know what I've been through, and I definitely see what's happening uh, with the veterans, with my brothers and sisters, and I just want to be able to express. I mean, as much as I'd like to be much more aggressive about how I communicate, I find doing it through music, I can put a certain amount of grace to that because I don't want to be lecturing somebody. But if you're listening to a song and it starts making sense, that's that's what I look to go for.
It's definitely the emotional connection. I completely, I completely resonate with that sort of thought process. Although I find myself in my kind of sphere of influence lecturing because it's the only thing I can do based on the reality to try to reach what you call the innocent, which are the ignorant. But the problem is we have millions of people who don't understand what our system has become. And I want to ask you this question because why do you think most people that you've served with, including yourself, choose to serve, and what does honor and service mean to them?
It's interesting what you think you're going to be doing and what you do in service are completely different. And I went into the military for absolutely one reason. My best friend, he was going to war, and I was going to go with him. But what I learned over the 10 years that I did serve is when I see our flag, that speaks to me. That speaks to me in my soul. And when I went in, I didn't feel it, but I earned it. You look at the veterans around us, any one of these individuals would give you the shirt off their back. They wouldn't even think twice about it. But that's something that they learned within, in many cases, very hostile places.
So the flag's a point of pride, and it's a aspirational sort of emotive thing that you feel in your heart and soul, based on, I would assume, liberty and justice for all. Is that part of it? Is that part of the notion of the grand sort of reason of the United States that we provide freedom and liberty for all of our citizens? Is that something that's worth fighting for?
Yeah, absolutely.
By contrast, based on what you've seen overseas and everywhere else, do you think, how would you qualify the notion of corruption? Do you have an idea? Do you have a sense of corruption? What does corruption mean to you?
Well, corruption, simply put, it's everywhere. In the different tours of duty that I did overseas, you can see that especially with the local populace. But then on the back end of that, it's always the same people that are building your chow halls, your your um your barracks, always the same contractors. And so they did a great job. I got no complaints about that. But I also know that even though for a federal contract, you need to have at least three bids go in for any federal contract, that it seems like the same companies kept winning those contracts.
Further to that point, interestingly enough, another friend of mine who served, he was a specialist at high value targets, is what he called. And he would tell me stories where, he'd be in a comm command where they would oversee these assassinations using drones of high level targets in different theaters. But part and parcel to that would be he would personally go to very volatile places. And we're talking Afghanistan, we're talking Iraq, right? And he would
Right.
personally deliver truckloads of cash to warlords. He would provide. He said there was no accounting, there was no um, real full understanding of what the pipeline of the money was. He was simply the deliverer because he would do that to get information, to find the high value targets to eliminate. Okay. That was his job for literally 15 years. Okay. And
Wow.
he had PTSD, but, and he really didn't have, well, I don't want to speak for him because he's not here, but he was a brilliant guy. His personal sense of humor was like nobody I'd ever met, considering what he had seen. But this was like one of the other arteries behind the story. And so I ask you, just as a kind of a qualifying question, what your reaction is to that. Is it surprising to you that that was going on, or is that something intuitively that you felt as an extension of what your experience was?
We knew it was going on.
Okay.
And normally, so being an army medic, I'm not the guy, I'm not the bad guy. I'm not
Right.
holding cash, but there are three-letter agencies that will be working around you, and they are very politely introduced to you that these people are our guests. Please make sure you know they're welcome. And we'd be looking at these guys like, I don't even want to get near you, man. All right. It's like, I know you got your job and I got my job, but here's the thing, I got to play by rules. And some of these other organizations, they don't have that restriction.
Wow, was that a powerful statement, Mike? That's an incredibly powerful statement, because I want to just introduce this to you and I just want to get your reaction to it, because I'm hoping that you and I can have a long relationship and friendship after the fact. Because I guess the first question I want to ask you, because I know you wrote this song before the Trump administration had taken power, before Doge, and before all we're seeing in terms of rug pulling the budgets of through government efficiency, which is supposed to get rid of I keep conflating those two words, uh, fraud, waste,
Fraud,
and abuse,
waste, and abuse.
right?
Yep.
Fraud, waste, and abuse within these corollaries that obviously veterans depend on for survival. Okay, not only for their health and their mental health and all of those things, but there's other aspects of it, whether it's jobs, whether it's through the Veterans Administration, through mortgages, and all sorts of things. When that when that pipeline of assistance that is part of the contract of when you go serve many tours of duty, that you think that these what do we call them, a lot of people use the misnomer and they pervert this whole thing, benefits, right? Like they think benefits are socials. No, benefits are part of the contract. Benefits are you've done your tour, you've served your country. These benefits are there for the rest of your life, particularly in these particular events based on post-traumatic stress disorder and many of these other elements that we're talking about. What does it make you, how does it make you feel, even though it's a rhetorical question, because I heard it in your song? And yes, I don't want you to feel like you're lecturing people, but just in terms of the dialogue, how does it make you feel when you see, quite frankly, this betrayal of the contract, right?
It's disheartening. And it's something that where I'm coming from is very simple. It's just see through me. And I can also be a sounding board for those around us that are totally getting shafted right now. And that's the way I choose to approach it. Because yeah, you're right. Your benefits, they can disappear. The first time I went to the VA, I didn't know that I was going to be charged for that. So when I got a bill, I was a little bit shocked, but you figure things out. But it's something where I do believe right now we're seeing definitely things that are being downsized aggressively. Where my experience, see, when I got out in 2000, I waited 20 years before I ever got my VA card because when I was exiting the military, they sent me for medical evaluation because I got busted up more than once. And I was in a waiting room and I was looking at guys missing arms and legs. Patrick, I just made the flat out choice. These guys need it more than I did. I walked out. 20 years later, injuries do catch up with you. And so I did go to the VA. But the thing that I noticed from those that were using the VA on a regular basis, it was more like a drip effect where, oh, well, that benefit's gone. Now this other benefit's gone. Now this other one's gone. But it was a slow process. It's not like what we're seeing right now.
Well, now I'm going to turn this to the final kind of section of our discussion because I'm really, really interested to see how you respond to some of this information. So again, Doge, the Department of Government Efficiency, led by the world's richest man. Now, Elon Musk, I used to be a huge fan of. Okay, I was a big fan of Tesla. I was all about the paradigm change, getting off of fossil fuel to renewable energies. And Tesla and Elon Musk's company, First Solar, were all about the innovation and the technology that go into, obviously, the paradigm change, of which underscored a lot of the wars that we've been in for the last 20 years.
Right.
Everything from Iraq post 9/11 is a direct corollary to the continued subsistence of the world economy on fossil fuel. And we have the technology. In fact, I had interviewed, by the way, the former director of the CIA, who was a very high level version in the Department of Defense, whose entire purpose, no matter what he was involved with at all of those times, was to re-engineer the energy paradigm of the military, because the military had recognized that it was in supply lines and everything else, that it was so dependent upon fossil fuel that could create problems, that they had to create alternatives to make the fighting forces more efficient through solar and some of the other renewable energy paradigms that could help those in theater, right? All of the
Right.
different combat groups. So it was a practicality. So we're talking about we're talking about technologies that's existed for decades, okay? But then here we have the wars post 9/11, yada, yada, yada. So here we are in 2025, and you've got Elon Musk, the guy who ended up getting billions of dollars in government contracts initially because of what happened in the time period, right?
Right.
That developed, Tesla into a powerhouse because the guarantee of Tesla was the United States government, which was fantastic from where I was sitting at the time because we were moving towards creating an electrical revolution within our auto industry globally, okay, which we've all seen, manifest quite a bit. Now, in terms of Elon continued down that path where, of course, he became the CEO of SpaceX, which has enabled him becoming the foremost recipient of government contracts through the Pentagon, particularly as it relates to, I mentioned SpaceX, but I'm thinking of the telecom company and obviously the satellite. Why am I amiss at the moment? You know what I'm talking about, I'm sure. His satellite company. Why can't I think of the name of it?
It was low orbiting satellites
Yeah,
that he was doing.
as part of SpaceX. But anyway, the subsidiary or whatever it's called. But the point is that Elon has been on this government contract, which some people call it government subsidies, of course, for the revolving door. What we, in terms of, you were talking about contractors, and that could get into a conversation of monopolization and everything else. But there's even more behind the scenes in terms of how Wall Street finances this stuff, right? So this guy, during the time period of, let's say, COVID, quadrupled his net worth at a time when they weren't selling more Teslas, for example. It's part and
Right.
parcel to a lot of things behind the scene that deal with all of the financial groups. But you put all of these types of things together, and you find out that Elon, before the election, was worth $256 billion. Okay. Richest man in the world. He throws $277 million into Donald Trump's presidential campaign. Now, by contrast, by the way, the Democrats had 1.5 billion that they put into their campaign for Kamala Harris, and they spent a lot of that on, quite frankly, celebrity endorsements. But moving forward, following Donald Trump's victory, for however we want to determine that, Elon, on paper, his companies, his net worth increased another $146 billion. So $277 billion, it's $1 million into the campaign to increase his net worth up to was north of $450 billion. He's now since lost about 50 to 60 billion, but who's counting when you're worth north of $100 billion, by the way?
Yeah, I think you'll be able to live on that, right? You know?
$1 billion would now enable 10 generations of your family to live without having to do a thing, okay? Let alone go to serve their country, right? So, all of this being said, and Elon Musk is in the position to rug pull veterans' benefits and the ability for all veterans who serve their country for however many tours to only have their lives dissipate to be on the back end of potentially in a situation to commit suicide because of what was the line that you said in your wonderful lyrics? I'm going to look back at it again. That I gave all my life. I gave my all for freedom's call, but freedom doesn't catch my fall. The bills stack high, the pain runs deep. Restless night, no peaceful sleep. I paid the price for liberty, but now the cost is drowning me. Now I laid quite a bit on you right there. Can you just kind of give me your thoughts about the paradox that I've just laid out?
Well, it's interesting. Elon, of course, is right in the middle of the public spotlight right now. And reasonably, he's doing quite well. I I see that there's other organizations that are perhaps behind the scenes that were profiting just as much. But the bottom line is taking away services that are needed by veterans and their family. That's something that I'm very grateful that you're bringing attention to.
So I'll ask you another final kind of question to set up, but it's important that I try to connect with you because hopefully you and I can write this song together if you feel compelled downstream, okay?
I'm in.
So, just so you know, after the 2008 great financial crisis, which was the housing collapse, that was all a setup. That was all a fraud. That was the world's largest racketeering conspiracy, financial conspiracy in the history of the world. It devastated north of 30 million Americans directly, okay? And it was all a setup. It was a con. And my work, and I'll introduce you to my work, it's called The Con. It's available for free at thecon.tv. We made it for free. It took us millions of dollars, thousands of hours to make this, but we got it out there to the public for free. And it deals with veterans who who committed suicide as a result of this unbelievable scenario, as well as a whole sort of panoply of the American experience that went down because of this massive fraud. But in the world that we're supposed to live in, where we defend with liberty and freedom and justice for all, is this other notion of that when you have the freedom and liberty in the United States, the sort of expectation is that you do deliver on behalf of yourself and your family, that you do have the ability to pull yourself up by the bootstraps, that you do have the ability to make it in this world because we have such incredible opportunities, yada, yada, yada. And that we also have a notion of capitalism. The idea of the economic paradigm of capitalism in our country is risk reward. The best people create the best products, the best solutions, the best this and that, and they get it to market, and to the victors go the spoils. But the flip side in the paradigm of capitalism is if you do stupid things, if you lie, steal, and cheat, if you deceive your customers, if you are a criminal, then you go down either by the law or by market forces. You disappear. But what we did in the aftermath of the 2008 great financial crisis was we provided tens of trillions of dollars illegally to the people that rug pulled the world. Now, the people that rug pulled the world are the financial sector that constitutes this make believe we are the titans of capitalism. Because what you have to understand is that they got paid the tens of trillions of dollars illegally by grifting the full faith and credit of the United States of America, that, of course, you and your brother warriors had fought to defend with your lives throughout these tours and everything else that people didn't even know existed, that you had so aptly and brilliantly coined as innocence as opposed to ignorance, and I appreciate that. But this has been going on now for many, many years. And what it means is that we've provided tens of trillions of dollars illegally to criminal enterprises that are now above the law and above market forces, both of which you fought for liberty and justice to personify. That was what you gave your life for. That's what your brothers have given your life for. But as it turns out, the paradox is we are just as corrupt now as we were, and we have been, quite frankly, since at least the turn of the century, right? At least the last 20 years, but it goes on longer than that. But
Yeah.
now it's kind of the end of it in terms of now it's all out in the open. That the world's richest man, for example, just part of this apparatus, he's one of many, right?
Right.
He is in control of budgets to strangle those who gave it all for their country, while other people stand at attention who didn't do that, who might have been a part of this whole smorgasbord and who aren't innocent, by the way, and demand allegiance and say thank you for your service. Just out of curiosity, do you see the paradox and the unfortunate poison of this reality that we all face?
I'm going to give you a very different view on this. When you surf, you kind of get used to, well, you get used to just getting screwed over, right? Because you could be deployed overseas. So let's say I'm in Bosnia and I'm looking at my time before I can come back, and then all of a sudden you're involuntarily extended for a month, a year, whatever it is. Now that's an extreme example. No, normally it's just a couple of months, but we are conditioned for disappointment. I I don't mean to be dark about saying this. You just kind of get used to being let down is the easier way. But my brothers and sisters and I, we get back and certain services are getting downsized. We're kind of used to that already. And I'm not saying it's right and I don't condone it, but I do know that somebody's making a lot of money. It's definitely not us, but that's where I take it back to. There's two organizations, and Veteran Debt, who helped out this veteran that was just went through hell, and then the organization I'm part of called the Harmonetics Project, and we partnered together for a very good reason, because we know that if somebody has bills stacking up, they're probably thinking about eating a bullet if they still have life insurance. That's just our mindset. And the other part is once you pay off that debt, you still need to heal yourself. And that's what the Harmonetics, it's something that Dr. Jeffrey Zimmerman, an Oriental medical doctor, he's been working on for 40 years. I've been part of this team for 2 years, but this is how we approach it. Because as much as I'd like to say that these large organizations, that's you talked about the real estate collapse, too big to fail. That's what was going through my mind. I remember that.
That's what I'm talking about. That's
Yeah.
exactly who is responsible for what I am telling you, which, by the way, is socialism for criminals, just so you know.
Okay. I like how you say that. So our whole goal is this. I figure if we can help people out with the debt, and what this overall program does is that it goes out onto the debt market and it buys large amounts of debt for pennies on the dollar and
Right,
forgives it. I mean, it's
right,
it's powerful.
right.
And you know, I figure as much as I'd like to be part of something that's going to help change the bigger picture that you so clearly communicate, you know, I just got to change this, and then I can help others.
I
Right?
hear you, and I'm here to help you do that. But I've got to press on this, and I'm so sorry I do because I know where you're coming from. But I want to hear this from your lips to my ears because you're a very thoughtful, eloquent guy. Okay, again, this is a shortcut. I hope that you'll endeavor me or humor me and take a look at my work that I'll send you after this. And I would love to talk to you further about collaborating on potentially a song because what I'm attempting to do, okay, is what the American patriots would have done against tyranny and did against tyranny. There was a reason we had an American Revolution. We had an American Revolution against King George III and the trifecta of the greatest military in the world at that time period, which of course was the British Royal Navy, the Redcoats, but they were also tied to the East India Trading Company, which was all about imperialism, which was taxation without representation, which led to the revolution. And then, of course, you have Parliament, which was the corporate sort of strategy behind the whole thing. The United States is an expression of that today, more so than it was the revolutionary ideals that gave us the separation of powers, the Bill of Rights, and the Constitution to create, a balance and harmony to provide freedom and liberty and justice for all. Because the integrity of law was the thing that was above all else, not the supremacy of kings exploiting everybody else. What people need to understand is what we've basically commissioned Trump to be because of the Supreme Court corruption 6 months ago, to knight him above the law, is that, as we can see right now, the law is dead. And so without the law actually having the teeth to hold power to account in a way that is, it's one thing to be disappointed, but it's another thing to be expendable. And as well as I do, your veteran brothers in arms, especially those that face suicide because of this crushing debt, are not expendable. In fact, just the opposite. They came back alive because they fought for our principles and our ideals, and they are the reason that our flag flies. That is the bottom line. What we have to understand as a collective people is that we've been betrayed by what you just identified, which has lasted for 4 decades. And so if we can, that has impacted millions and millions of people, and it's not getting better, it's getting much, much worse rapidly. So in conclusion, and I hate to be the guy that did just what you said you don't like to do, which is lecture. So please humor me on that.
No, I love you, man. No, you're fine. You're totally fine.
I don't mean to lecture you, but this is part and parcel to your experience and what I'm trying to get to the American people. Just kind of a final word on that. As I'm explaining this to you, and I can't wait to hear what you say now versus if you do happen to see our work, and we're going to get this out there and get everybody, on the same page of what you've described with ending veterans' debt. And obviously, what was the second group of people that you're working with?
It's the Harmonetics Project.
See, I love that. Harmony, by the way, is extremely important, okay? Because everything has got to be in balance. That's a whole nother story. But what we're not right now, when you give tens of trillions of dollars to make certain people, a tiny, tiny group of people, which is called tyranny above the law and market forces, which is the exact same thing that the American patriots had to fight to create the United States to begin with. Please give me some final words and assessment of how you're responding to this nightmare, in addition to where you came in the beginning of this conversation and now where you're leaving it. Have you heard anything here that further demonstrates what you intuitively knew? Let's put it that way.
Well, you definitely highlighted what I saw firsthand, especially downrange. Lots of money going to mysterious places by people that look like they were rental cars and polo shirts. And we just know, stay away from them, because we definitely could see firsthand that there's something bigger going on. But
if you can spend trillions of dollars on corruption, do you think that's a better way to spend than helping our veterans?
Well, I think that's a no-brainer. Of course not.
It's a stupid question. It's for the people out there. That's what I'm trying to.
Yeah.
Guys, this is reality. We've got to learn everything that we've seen for the past 25 years is an upside down perverted madness. And it's time for us all to come together to be able to lift our spirits. And through this wonderful song, again, by Mike Williams, which is called The Price We Paid. Please listen to it. Please spread the word. Please get everybody to understand that it's time to end veterans' debt and to follow Mike Williams and the Harmonic Project. And we look forward.
Harmonetics. Yep.
Harmonetics. I apologize.
No worries.
Project. And also everything and anything that we can do to come together to elevate the truth above the madness of lies. My friends, thank you for tuning in. And until next time, I'm going to push stop record. Okay. Just give me 1 second.